habitat community, right? The wilderness, the climate system, do all these things have moral status directly? Or are we stuck in anthro land permanently, which we may well be? Which I will tell you right up front that I'm starting to suspect we may well be. And maybe these anthropocentric ethics that we're going to cover in the next 3 weeks are as good as it's going to get. You know, someone like, a thinker like E.O. Wilson, for example. And then maybe, you know, then we start doing the meta-ethical heavy lifting, starting in week 4, right? And it may be that we never quite get it done, and then we always get sent back down, you know, like a salmon trying to swim up over the falls. He just never makes it, right? He always gets knocked back down, and finally, well, we're stuck in anthro land. We may well be, right? But we're going to be searching. This is a search, right? I'm your tour guide. And I invite you to go on a tour of values in nature. And we may discover that there are some non-anthropocentric values in nature. And we may discover that a forest has moral status. We may discover that Earth as a whole has moral status. We may discover that the notion that humans can own the land or can own any natural resource is a metaphysical error. That may well be the case. That would be a very challenging and remarkable development if we discovered that much of the basis of our entire society is a metaphysical error, right? And in fact, the indigenous people did not make that same error, and so they are still on the right track, right? Although they have to deal with all this stuff that we threw in their home. Anyway, so we do all these throughout the term, though, right? We do some meta-ethics. We do normative ethics is the most common, you know, if you take another ethics class, just a regular intra-human class, right? This is special because we have to talk about the moral status of non-human things. But if you take any other ethics class, you don't ask that. Because it's just assumed going in that, you know, the woman, you know, a woman or a man have direct moral status, right? And maybe, you know, maybe some pre-human things like embryos, maybe, you know, have moral status. But, you know, a wolf pack, an orca pod, a climate system, come on, how can these things possibly have any moral status? That's just too challenging to even begin to explain how they could have direct moral status. Well, anyway, that's what we're going to set ourselves to do, okay? And we may not succeed. But I believe this is a very important class. I believe ethics classes in general are extremely important. And evidently, if I had lived in the middle of the 19th century, then my colleagues would have been fully in agreement with me. And unfortunately, philosophy and ethics have kind of been shunted aside as the business world has asserted its dominance. And now we have a university where, sadly, you know, philosophers have not gotten the respect they deserve. But in those days, the college president was almost invariably a philosopher, right? Because philosophers understand the value of education. And they have a broad understanding of the whole sweeping history of the development of Western, you know, and just ideas in general. Because people study Eastern philosophy too in these universities. Anyway, but this guy Douglas Sloan wrote a book called The Scottish Enlightenment and the American College Ideal. And he pointed out that throughout most of the 19th century, the most important course in the college curriculum was moral philosophy, taught usually by the college president, required of all senior students. The moral philosophy course was regarded as the capstone of the curriculum. It aimed to pull together, to integrate, and to give meaning and purpose to the student's entire college experience and course of study. In so doing, it even more importantly sought to equip the graduating seniors with the ethical sensitivity and insight needed in order to put their newly acquired knowledge to use in ways that would benefit not only themselves and their own personal achievement, but the larger society as well. Imagine that. You know, at a university, you're not just training yourself to earn money somewhere else. You're actually educating, uplifting yourself to become a leader of society and to share your gifts with other people so that society will be better. All right, and there are, you know, I always have to tip my hat to these other positions that, you know, we'd quickly be done if these if any one of these 3 theories is true, then we might as well call it quits now and just, okay, I'll give you all A's and we don't need to study ethics at all. If all moral judgments are equally valid, these are all coherent theories, by the way, so I say that candidly right up front, right? These are all coherent theories, and ultimately they can't be refuted. None of these theories can actually be refuted. They can just kind of be thought, you know, I mean, very few people accept them, but because they hang together, their stories hang together, they can't just be rejected. But there are, people that just say all moral judgments are equally valid, and that's it. And there's no point in studying them. Why even bother to try to say his moral judgment? Save the old-growth forest. Harvest the old-growth forest. Equally valid moral judgments. Just matters of taste and preference. He's a hippy-dippy guy who grew up in a family of environmentalists and backpackers. Of course he's going to love the old. She grew up in a total consumer watching TV all the time. Of course she's going to, not care. So, but who cares? Neither one's right, neither one's wrong. All moral judgments are equally valid. No philosophically significant difference between one's moral judgments and one's preferences in food or clothing. Okay? And then you could also be a radical subjectivist and just and that's another normative theory. Subjectivism is a normative theory that holds that the proper measure of the good is what the individual wants. So the good is always going to vary from person to person to person, all right? Because every person has a different set of deep-seated, strong desires, all right? And egoists are also relativists. Nihilists are also relativists, right? According to relativism, there is no right or wrong, right? It's all a matter of taste and opinion. And then you could also, on the far other side of the spectrum, you could also just be a strongly religious person, right? And just say that I know what the moral law is. And we can't study it. We need to receive it through divine revelation, for example. Okay? By studying Scripture or through direct revelation, if you want to go that way. Anyway, but enough of that. We're studying ethics, and what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up articulating a number of different positions that you can occupy on this spectrum between radical subjectivism and radical objectivism. All the normative theories that we study this term are somewhere in the middle. Okay? So, and radical objectivism could also be called absolutism, right? So it's relativism versus absolutism. We're going to end up somewhere in the middle. Right? We're not going to find the absolute ultimate answers to any of these moral questions. Right? If you want that, you got to go to church. There's some place where that's what they offer. Right? We don't offer that here in philosophy class. We offer an invitation to dwell on the questions. Right? And the questions are just ongoing, and they help us to become better people. Believe it or not, by just understanding the questions. All right. It's not about finding the truth. We'll never do that. It's about dwelling on the questions. All right, so I try to define environmental ethics for you right off the bat. Analysis and evaluation of beliefs about humankind's relationship with natural resources. Okay? That's as good as I can come up with, at least as of a year ago or so. I should revisit it. Analysis and evaluation of beliefs about humankind's relationship with natural resources. And I believe this is an extremely important, all right? This is my little editorial. Every now and then I editorialize a little bit. But in general, and we dip our toes a little bit into politics throughout the term. But you'll notice that when we focus on ethics, the political questions kind of recede, and when we start to really, and of course the ethical questions precede. You can't really answer the political questions without first answering the ethical questions. So although this class, and politically, I'll just be quite candid. I'm a far left, but I'm also. Anyway, I'm not any kind of socialist like that, but I don't know. You'll figure out. I mean, I'm a mixture of different things. In some ways I'm deeply conservative, and in some ways but I'm always on the side of the earth, and people who live close to the earth, and their family values seem to be pretty in order too. By the way, people who live close to the earth don't seem to have any family dysfunction, or very little anyway. Anyway, but we're all alienated. We're in trouble. We're in deep trouble. Did you guys notice that? You ever wake up and just think, God, man, how could things have gotten so far out of balance and just so crazy? Well, I think in a university, maybe you have to acknowledge things that out there you can't acknowledge, or maybe you can get away with not acknowledging. But the scientists, and those are our guys, right? I mean, in a university, scientists are, they're the ones who tell us what's going on, right? Physically, empirically, the reality of the things. Climate scientists are telling us some very disturbing things lately, like the last 5, 10 years, 20 years, right? People who understand how Earth climate systems work, nobody understands them totally. There's still a lot, that we don't know about how climate systems. It's all related to the ocean, the currents in the ocean, and the Arctic, and anyway. Someone left the freezer open up there, I think. Now, that's one explanation for all these really intense winters we've been having lately. Anyway, but scientists are telling us that and that's a good starting point, I think, for an environmental ethics class, right? In my book, Enlightenment Earth Ethics, I come from a family of scientists, and you know, they've made very important contributions. We wouldn't have any of this technology if they had not made an effort to understand the regular laws that pertain, you know, among everything in the universe. And so when they're telling us that every ecosystem is collapsing, right, the whole northern part of the globe is melting. And you know, every continent was inhabited by humans. Isn't that amazing? Except Antarctica. Antarctica is the only continent that humans never settled. But there are people all over the North Pole, right? And their culture has evolved over thousands and thousands of years based on snow and ice, right? They have snow and ice-based cultures. And now when they wake up, they're surrounded by slush and mud, right? And all those animals that needed the ice that they relied on are gone, and they're going away. And anyway, you know, scientists are observing these things, and it seems that the urgency of a moral response is staring us in the face. You know, it seems to me, I gave up driving, just gave it up, because I realized, man, at some point you just got to stop. Every person has to just stop doing the things that we know are causing these calamitous developments that scientists, our guys, are telling us about. Every species is in dramatic decline, except for those who are fortunate enough to have a general, you know, to have general adaptations like raccoons and rats and pigeons or adaptations to humans, right? Crows and the corvids, I think, like us humans quite a bit because we change the environment in ways that they like. But all the other species, right? They're all specialists, right? And their habitats are all just falling apart. Their food sources are just disappearing, right? Especially with global anthropogenic climate destabilization. So they're all in rapid decline. And in a world where we know these things are happening, we might develop some pathologies. Even if we don't know that they're happening. If we're too young and too immature to know that these things are happening, we haven't read up on, you know, climate disintegration, then we're a deeply disturbed culture. From what I look around, you know, it just seems like we have a lot of disturbances. And I list, you know, some things going on. You know, these economic inequalities. It's shocking, the disparity of income. It's just shocking in this country, and it's prima facie evidence of a deeply unfair, unjust economic system, right? I mean, there's no way that can be fair when you have such dramatic disparity in wealth and income. You have a few people way up here, and then almost everyone way down here. So we've lost, you know, access to health care. We've lost access to nutritious food. We've lost social mobility. Chances are, you know, whatever economic status you were born into, that's the one you're going to die in, right? That's it. Very few people move up anymore. And these are all, you know, serious issues. So in such a world is what I suggest: the study of environmental ethics, or Enlightenment Earth Ethics. The analysis and evaluation of beliefs about our relationships with natural resources should perhaps be considered the keystone of a liberal arts education. In other words, this might be a pretty damn important class, okay? And I like to think it's extremely important, and I wish everyone would take a class like this. And I wish we had more connections. You know, medical ethicists have a lot of connections to hospitals, right? But us environmental ethicists, what do we have? I mean, we ought to have internships in the Forest Service and all these resource management agencies. But anyway, we're a little behind the curve, I guess. You know, us philosophers, we're so need to be more practically minded. All right, anyway, so 4 just general goals real quickly. Basic cultivation of ecological literacy in fact and value. So hopefully when we go back at the end of the term, you'll be able to go back to this slide and decide whether or not we did this. Did your professor fulfill what he set out to do? And this is what I'm hoping to do, what I'm hoping to accomplish. Just cultivate ecological literacy in fact and value. We do tend to focus more on natural resources of the Pacific Northwest. I talk a lot about salmon. right? Salmon are the ultimate natural resource of the Pacific Northwest. We once had by far, the most lucrative, valuable salmon fishery in the world, swimming right past our city in the Columbia River, right? Upwards of 20, 30 million annual, migration, just absolutely phenomenal, unbelievable. The river was clogged with fish, not just once a year, but several times a year. Anyway, and that's all, of course, we've wiped out our salmon fishery. Our ancestors destroyed our salmon fishery by 97 to 99%, right? That's how few are left. If you count hatchery fish, then 3% survives. If you don't count hatchery fish, 1% of the historic abundance is still there. And so anyway, we focus on that. We focus on our forests, our rivers. We do also talk about anthropogenic climate destabilization, although that's not one of the, well, I guess, yeah, I think I put that as one of our topics later on. That's a huge topic. And I might ask, no, that's right, he's on sabbatical. I normally have my geology professor friend, Andrew Fountain, come and give a guest lecture on glaciology and climate disintegration, but he's not around this year, so. Anyway, so that's first, all right? Just cultivate ecological literacy. Know what's going on factually in our Northwest home, and also, some of the lights start going on in your mind with value. Once you start understanding the richness of the facts, or the richness of the story that you pick up from studying the facts, right? Just the story of a salmon's life is phenomenal, right? And all of a sudden you start thinking, wow, man, there's value there that I didn't even know, because I didn't know that the salmon did all that. Anyway, so developing factual, scientific, ecological, biological literacy about where we live also serves to develop a moral maturity, literacy about the values of the different critters that we encounter and their habitats. All right, we also have to make a strong effort to understand the dominant culture. Okay? How did things end up like this? How did our culture come to treat everything in nature as property, as possession, as object? How did our society come to disenchant everything in the natural world? Right? Because the natural world used to be enchanted for every culture. And at some point the natural world stopped being an enchanting, magical place in the minds of our ancestors, but a place to be exploited, a dead mechanism to be figured out and manipulated. And that attitude persists to this day, right? In factory farms, the way that all these livestock are treated, and then in factory forestry, in mining, fracking, drilling, it's quite remarkable, the skill. Technological termites is what humans have become, right? And my hope is that restoration of, cultivating the metaphysical monkey in ourselves, cultivating our metaphysical skills, will counteract our tendencies toward being technological termites. Like that, right? We're just digging, and all the foundations of our home are just collapsing as we keep digging deeper and deeper. There's a hand up way back there. Yes?
Yeah. Are we going to talk about the role that factory farming has on the environment at all?
Well, probably not. And remember, this is a philosophy class, an ethics class. Yeah. And when you talk about effect of something on the environment, that's an empirical question. Yeah. And so are you an environmental science major?
No.
Okay. Well, you could take other classes in the environmental science department, right? Okay. But what we will do, you said the effect of what now?
Factory farming.
Oh, factory farming, yeah. So we spend only one class on where we focus on animal rights, because we just don't have enough time, right? If we had 16 weeks in a semester, then we could spend a whole week or even 2 weeks on animal rights. But we only have 10 weeks, and they go by just like that, right? This term goes by so quickly. So we don't. So we spend one class on animal rights, and the question, when you ask about the moral status, these animals that are being factory farmed might have moral status, and right, in which that's not exactly, obviously not like our moral status, or not necessarily like our moral status. It might be somewhat different, but if they have some kind of moral status, then which they do. If you look at laws, right? I mean, there are laws against being cruel even in a factory farm.
I was going to say, without moral status, by Kantian's factory farming is still wrong.
Yes, by Kantian standards, because it degrades the humanity of the people who are participating in it. That's right. Anyway, but that's to answer your question. We're gonna focus we're gonna always zero in on the normative question, not the factual question. All right. But oftentimes, as we'll see, the factual question is extremely important to the normative question, and even changes our answer to the normative question. All right. So by the end of the term, you might be hopefully you might be formulating a few different types of responses, and I've listed 4 different kinds of response, and then just given examples of what those kinds of responses might look like. All right, but this is the heart of the course right here. Okay, this third point of the 4 goals that I identify for my course. The heart of the course is understanding the philosophical and ethical foundations of modern North American environmental ethics. We have an environmental movement in this country. And our environmental movement was stronger a long time ago than any other country in the world, from what I can tell. We made our first national park in 1872. Yellowstone was the first national park, 1872. Henry David Thoreau was the first person to use the term national park. In one of his journal entries in the 1840s, I think around 1844 or something, he wrote in his journal, he suggested the idea of a system of national parks. And for a long time, for 100 years, we were the only country that had any national parks at all. So there's an amazing story here. The story of and it's partly a history, right? There are certain major events that took place in the history of North American. In those days, it was called conservationism. All right, environmentalism, the environmental movement, does not emerge until the late 60s. All right. And that's a big change, right? From conservationism to environmentalism. We need to pay close attention because the philosophical foundations of a full-fledged environmental outlook are probably non-anthropocentric, whereas the philosophical foundations of a conservationist ethic, they don't even worry about that stuff. It's all human-centered to begin with. Anyway, all right. So there are 2, right? We're going to be just putting together these different ethics as we go along, these different traditions, right? Each tradition offers a different reading of what an environmental ethic should look like. And the first component of every environmental ethic is an axiological orientation. Okay, kind of a strange word. It sounds like axis or something like that. And axiology, you can actually look it up in Wikipedia, and there's even an entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on axiology. And it's a little bit different. It's part of the study of ethics, but it's best identified as a meta-ethical inquiry. Axiology is a meta-ethical inquiry about, the inquiry is what is or what should be the basic unit of moral concern, or what has moral status, or what has intrinsic value or inherent value. Okay, so for example, we know why an old-growth forest is instrumentally valuable. Okay, here's some of that terminology that's going to bewilder and befuddle a lot of you, right? Instrumental is contrasted with inherent. Instrumental can also be contrasted with intrinsic. All right. Now we know that old-growth forests, or any kind of forest, any kind of living thing, has all kinds of extrinsic values, right? Extrinsic meaning, stuff like the forest provides us with wood, the forest provides us with recreation, with scenic beauty, right? With scientific knowledge, right? Those are all values, but they're not intrinsic to the forest. They're extrinsic, right? They just we come along and use the forest in these different ways, okay? But they don't have, right? Unless you've taken a philosophy class, an environmental ethics class, and made some axiological commitments about the moral status of forests or trees, then you're probably going to be very skeptical about the claim that a forest has any intrinsic value at all, right? any inherent value. It's just instrumentally valuable. Now, it's instrumental, but the fact, if you insist that it's only instrumentally valuable, you can still be a really strong and passionate environmentalist, right? Because you could say, well, it's instrumentally valuable because it provides me and my family with all this beautiful opportunity to get away from the rat race, right? I'm here just in this majestic old growth forest, and we can camp out and we can just get back to nature for several days, and it has such a healing effect on me, right? And all the people who use it, right? Plus it's beautiful, plus it helps clean the air, right? Maybe even these big trees help bring rain, right? The stream that goes through the forest is a lot cleaner, right, than a stream that would go through a used up place, right? A clear cut or something, right? So saying that the forest is only valuable for instrumental reasons does not preclude you from being an environmentalist. It does basically identify you as a conservationist and not really a full-fledged environmentalist. All right, so there are four possible, and really the practically speaking, in terms of the debate, the real-life debate that goes on between these different points of view, there are really only three. All right, there is the familiar old humans are number one, right? Strongly anthropocentric individualism. Only the human individual has moral status. Because only the human individual is a possessor of rationality and autonomy, right? So how could anything else have moral status? A community? What's that? That's just a collection of individuals. Those individuals all have moral status, but the community, right? So you could be an anthropocentric individualist. Only human individuals have direct moral status. You could be an anthropocentric holist, or a holistic anthropocentrist, and then you would say, yeah, human individuals and human communities have direct independent moral status. And this would be a garden variety conservationist. I'm perfectly content. It's taken me a while to come around to this point of view, but I would characterize conservationism as a form of rural utilitarianism, and it's no longer individualistic. Conservationism is kind of, at the outset, a holistic philosophy. Anyway, and then as we get more advanced, we'll study it. So, but the holistic anthropocentrist orientation really kind of blends in. Either you're an anthropocentrist, or you're an animal rights advocate, or you're an ecocentrist. Okay, these are the ecocentrists down here. Not more than this. This is where most people identify Leopold. There's some controversy over exactly what Leopold's philosophy was, because he didn't ever try to set out his ethic, really, because he was writing for a popular audience, and Leopold himself had a career as a scientist. He was a forester and a wildlife manager, right, game manager early in his career. And so he's a scientist, and he's writing, but he's also writing for a popular audience. So when professionally trained philosophers sit down with Leopold, there's still quite a bit of debate about what exactly Leopold was committed to philosophically. Was he committed to this axiological orientation, or was he really actually more of just an anthropocentric holist? And there are some, we'll read Brian Norton, who reads him like this, and then we'll read Collicutt, who reads him like this. All right? Anyway, but these are the animal rights people here, right? If you go to a conference on animal rights, you can always identify the environmentalists are separate from the animal rights people. If you're an animal rights advocate, you're going to say every animal, the basis of moral value is the individual. If it's a living being, then it has moral status. You could go all that way. If some people just want to go as far as sentience. Anyway, there's a lot of different gradations. These are just two examples of but the point is that humans aren't the only individuals that are valuable, right? There are other individuals out there because of their sentience, because of their remarkable level of self-awareness, perhaps because of some cognitive skills or linguistic skills that they have, right? There are all kinds of different dividing lines you could make between that which has moral status and that which does not, right? But all of those different accounts are going to be variations on this orientation, all right? All right, and this stuff will all become second nature to you soon enough. So Every environmental ethic is going to have an identifiable axiological orientation, an identifiable answer to the question, what has direct, independent moral status? Okay? And every environmental ethic is also going to employ some kind of normative theory. A normative theory is a theory about how moral judgments are justified. Western philosophy has generated several time-tested normative theories. Consequentialism, natural law theory, deontology, and virtue ethics. All right. Now, and this is an insight into why our course here is more difficult than other ethics courses. If our course was a more traditional ethics course, a strictly human-centered course, such as, for example, criminal justice ethics, or the way I teach philosophy of sex and love, it's like an ethics of intimate relationships. They're all focused on human matters, right? We would focus almost entirely on normative theory and ignore questions about axiology. Why? Because we would just tacitly assume, like we do in our everyday lives, that the human individual, perhaps also the human community, are the only basic units of moral concern, the only entities in the universe which have direct independent moral status, the only entities that are inherently valuable, right? But unlike those other traditional ethics courses, in an environmental ethics course, we have to treat axiological questions as being equally important, okay? As normative questions. So we end up doing that ethical heavy lifting. You guys ended up having to, swing around on the metaphysical equipment, like good metaphysical monkeys. But you'll soon see, I'm not just speaking metaphorically here, this is real. All right, in more traditional ethics courses, we would ignore questions such as the following. What is the source and center of moral value? What is the ultimate unit of moral value? To what kind of being does moral value attach? These axiological questions call for a metaphysical analysis, right? How else are you going to answer them, right? We're wading into some heavy-duty metaphysics when we start asking questions about the nature of value. Hence, environmental ethics, this is the way I teach it, okay? There are other professors who teach it, and I understand, their classes are maybe a little more basic and elementary than mine, but I'm sorry, I can't help myself, I like those deep waters. So off we go. You better learn how to swim, right? Can monkeys swim? They're good swimmers, aren't they? All right, so the basic distinction that you start any ethics class with is the distinction between consequentialist normative theories and non-consequentialist normative theories. We're not really going to get into any non-consequentialist normative theories for a while, until after the midterm. Unless you read, both of our old pieces, the one from Leopold wrote that in the mid-1940s. He wrote The Land Ethic in the mid-1940s. That's the concluding chapter to his famous book, The Sand County Almanac. And then Albert Schweitzer was an Austrian physician and organist, musician and philosopher and theologian. Albert Schweitzer wrote his essay, Reverence for Life, I think in the 1930s. And both those guys at least point us in the direction of some non-consequentialist normative theories. But for the time being, we're just going to focus on, and utilitarianism, which is our subject, our main philosophical subject for today, is the leading example, the most powerful example of a consequentialist normative